The sun cast a golden glow over the village of Nyumbani, where the rhythm of life was a beautiful symphony of laughter, labor, and tradition. Children ran barefoot through the dusty paths, their voices ringing like bells, while women sat beneath the shade of towering baobab trees, weaving baskets and singing ancient songs passed down through generations. The air was filled with the rich aroma of roasted maize and the distant hum of elders sharing wisdom by the communal fire. In this close-knit village, where bonds were sacred and trust was the foundation of life, lived a young woman named Zuri. Zuri was the heart of Nyumbani, her presence a beacon of kindness and quiet strength. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her spirit that truly captivated those who knew her. With skin the color of rich mahogany and eyes that held the depth of the river that nourished their land, she moved through life with a grace that made people stop and take notice. She was known for her healing touch, her wisdom beyond her years, and the way she could tell stories that made the night feel alive with magic. The villagers often said that she was born with the ancestors' blessing, a gift not bestowed upon many. Despite her gentle nature, Zuri was no stranger to hardship. Her mother had passed when she was just a child, leaving her father to raise her and her elder brother, Jabari. While Zuri had taken after their mother in kindness, Jabari had inherited a different spirit, one that grew darker with time. Where Zuri found joy in giving, Jabari sought power in taking. He had always been restless, unsatisfied with the simple life their village offered. While others cherished tradition, Jabari looked beyond their borders, dreaming of wealth and influence. Though Zuri loved her brother, she could not ignore the change in him. He had grown distant, his once warm eyes clouded with desire for more. He spoke of gold, of merchants who traveled from distant lands, carrying riches beyond imagination. To Jabari, the love of his people meant little compared to the allure of wealth. Zuri often worried for him, sensing that his hunger would one day lead him down a dangerous path. The village elders often spoke of destiny, of how the spirits wove the threads of fate long before one's first breath. Zuri had always believed in these teachings, but she never imagined that her own fate would be written in betrayal. As the days passed, an unsettling wind whispered through the village, carrying with it the promise of change. Something was coming, something that would shake the very foundations of the world Zuri knew. And in the heart of it all, unseen and unheard, was the hand of betrayal. Not from an outsider, not from a stranger, but from her own blood. The story of Zuri was not just one of love and loss, but of destiny's unyielding grip. And though she did not yet know it, her path was already set. The village of Nyumbani was a place of harmony, where the sun bathed the land in golden warmth and the rivers flowed like veins of life through the fields. Birds sang melodies of old, their calls blending with the rustling leaves and the soft hum of village life. In this peaceful haven, Zuri thrived. She had always been one with nature, feeling an unspoken connection to the trees, the wind, and the spirits that resided in the land. When she walked through the fields, the grass seemed to whisper secrets to her, and when she sat by the river, the water carried her dreams to unseen worlds. From a young age, Zuri had been drawn to the art of healing. Her grandmother, a revered medicine woman, had taught her the secrets of herbs, roots, and the power of touch. Under her guidance, Zuri learned to mix balms for wounds, brew teas to soothe fevers, and chant prayers that seemed to draw the sickness from ailing bodies. The villagers trusted her hands as much as they trusted the sunrise, and they came to her in times of need, seeking both remedies and wisdom. Despite her youth, Zuri carried the presence of an old soul, her voice steady, her heart open. But healing was not her only gift. Zuri was a storyteller, her words weaving worlds that could transport even the weariest soul to lands unseen. Children gathered at her feet in the evenings, their eyes wide with wonder as she spun tales of spirits and warriors, of love and loss, of gods who walked the earth disguised as men. Even the elders listened, nodding in approval, for they knew that a true storyteller was one chosen by the ancestors. Stories, after all, were not just entertainment, they were the bridge between past and present, the threads that bound them all together. Yet, despite the love she received from her people, Zuri's heart longed for something more. She dreamed of adventure beyond the borders of her village, of walking paths untrodden and seeing lands where the sun kissed the sea. She dreamed of a love as deep as the roots of the great baobab, a love that would stand firm against the strongest winds. She wanted to shape her own destiny, to carve a place for herself in the stories yet to be told. But not everyone celebrated Zuri's light. Jabari, her elder brother, had always watched her from the shadows, resentment simmering beneath his skin. He saw the way people revered her, how they whispered that she was blessed by the ancestors. He had once been the favored son, the strong one, the one their father had praised. But as Zuri's gifts flourished, Jabari felt himself fading into the background, reduced to just Zuri's brother. It was a wound that festered, a thorn buried deep within his pride. Jabari could not understand why the ancestors had chosen her. Why was it Zuri who was gifted with wisdom and not him? Why did the villagers look at her with admiration while he remained unseen? He longed for more respect, more wealth, more power. And with every passing day his envy grew. The village elders had spoken of destiny, of trials that would shape Zuri into the woman she was meant to become. They had seen visions in the flames, whispering among themselves of a great storm that would test her spirit. She would face betrayal, they said, but she would rise. She would suffer loss, but she would endure. She would be broken, but she would be reborn. Zuri did not fear destiny, for she believed in the wisdom of the elders. She trusted in the path laid before her, never once suspecting that the very blood in her veins would be the blade that sought to cut her down. The sun hung low in the sky when the merchant arrived, his presence casting a long shadow over Nyumbani. He was unlike anyone the villagers had ever seen, draped in flowing robes of deep indigo, his fingers adorned with rings that glinted like stolen stars. His eyes held the weight of many journeys, and his voice, smooth as river stones, carried promises of wealth beyond imagining. He came with mules laden with dazzling fabrics, intricately carved ivory, and gold that caught the sunlight in its embrace. The village gathered around him, murmuring in awe as he displayed his treasures. Never had they seen such riches up close. The merchant smiled knowingly, sensing their hunger, their curiosity. He spoke of distant lands where kings bathed in gold, where wealth was boundless, and where men could rewrite their fates with a single trade. Jabari stood at the edge of the crowd, his heart pounding with longing. He watched as villagers exchanged simple trinkets, hand-woven baskets, carved wooden figurines, rare animal skins, for glimmering coins and dazzling jewels. Their faces lit up with joy, their hands heavy with newfound wealth. The sight twisted something deep within him. Why should they, who had never desired more than their modest lives, hold such riches while he remained empty-handed? The merchant's keen eyes found Jabari, reading the hunger etched into his face. He approached with a knowing smile. "You seek more than what these simple trades can offer," the merchant said, his voice low, coaxing. "You are not like the others." Jabari swallowed, his hands clenched at his sides. "I want more," he admitted. "Gold. Power. A life greater than this." The merchant chuckled, a sound both warm and unsettling. "And what would you trade for such a life?" Jabari hesitated. He had little to offer. He owned no treasures, no rare possessions. His fists clenched in frustration, until the merchant leaned in closer, his voice a whisper laced with poison. "There is something far more valuable than trinkets," the merchant murmured. "Something that kings and spirits alike covet. Blood." Jabari's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" The merchant's smile deepened. "Your sister. She is special, is she not? Blessed by the ancestors, beloved by the village. There are those who would pay handsomely for such a soul." A chill ran down Jabari's spine. He looked toward Zuri, who stood by the river, her laughter light as the wind. She was everything he was not, admired, trusted, loved. The idea should have repulsed him, but instead, it lingered, curling around his thoughts like smoke. For the first time he hesitated. Despite his jealousy, Zuri was his sister. She had always been kind to him, always offered a hand even when he pushed hers away. The weight of his ancestors' teachings pressed against his chest. To betray one's own blood was to bring ruin upon the soul. But then he thought of the gold, the power, the life he could have. He imagined himself leaving Nyumbani behind, walking through foreign lands as a man of status, no longer living in the shadow of his sister. The merchant saw the conflict in Jabari's eyes and pressed his advantage. "Think of what you could be," he urged. "A great man, a wealthy man. All it takes is one choice." Jabari's heart pounded. His fingers twitched. The decision clawed at him, tearing at what little remained of his conscience. And in that moment, desire overpowered duty. He turned to the merchant, his voice steady, his fate sealed. "What must I do?" The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine as Zuri followed Jabari into the forest. The moon hung high, casting silver beams through the tangled canopy, painting shifting shadows on the ground. She trusted Jabari despite the distance that had grown between them over the years. So when he had come to her that evening, urgency in his voice, saying he needed her help to gather rare healing herbs deep within the woods, she had not hesitated. "Why so far into the forest?" she had asked, her bare feet brushing against the cool earth as they walked. "There is a place the elders speak of," Jabari replied smoothly, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "A hidden grove where the most potent herbs grow. I want to help you gather them. The village depends on you, Zuri." At his words, Zuri smiled, her heart warming. Perhaps her brother was finally opening his heart again, seeking connection instead of competition. If she had only known. They walked for what felt like an eternity, deeper into the wilderness, where the trees thickened, their twisted limbs reaching like skeletal fingers toward the heavens. The sounds of the village faded behind them, swallowed by the eerie silence of the forest. Zuri slowed her steps, sensing something was wrong. "Jabari, we are too far now," she murmured, glancing around uneasily. "This place feels unnatural." Jabari said nothing, his steps unwavering. And then, a rustle. A presence. Before Zuri could react, shadows lunged from the darkness. Rough hands grabbed her, forcing her to the ground. A cloth, thick and heavy, smothered her mouth, silencing her scream before it could escape. She struggled, her limbs thrashing, her heart hammering like a war drum. Panic surged through her veins as she fought against her unseen attackers, but they were too strong. Then she heard the voice. Cold. Unfamiliar. "She is the one," the merchant declared. "Bind her hands. Quickly." Zuri's mind reeled as her arms were wrenched behind her back, thick ropes biting into her wrists. She gasped for breath as she was yanked to her feet, eyes darting frantically in the dim moonlight. And then she saw him. Jabari. Standing just beyond the circle of men, his face cast in shadow, gold glinting in his trembling hands. Zuri's breath hitched. "Jabari?" Her voice trembled, disbelief seeping into every syllable. "What is happening?" Jabari averted his gaze, the weight of his choice pressing upon him like an unbearable burden. He had thought himself ready for this, had told himself it was just one sacrifice for a greater life. But as he looked into Zuri's eyes, eyes that had always held nothing but love for him, he felt something inside him fracture. Zuri's heartbeat pounded in her ears, her vision blurring with the sting of betrayal. "Jabari," she tried again, pleading, her voice breaking. "Why?" The merchant chuckled, stepping forward. "Because, dear girl, some men are willing to trade even blood for gold." Jabari flinched at the words, his fingers tightening around the sack of gold in his grip. He had what he wanted. Wealth. Freedom. The chance to be something greater than the forgotten son of Nyumbani. But why did it feel like he had just carved out a piece of his own soul? Zuri's knees buckled as she was dragged forward, her heart shattering with each step away from the life she had known. The weight of her brother's betrayal crushed her more than the ropes that bound her. She had always believed that family was sacred, that blood was thicker than the strongest river. But now, staring at the man who had once been her protector, she realized that some hearts could be bought, and hers had been sold. As the merchant and his men led her deeper into the night, Jabari stood motionless, watching her disappear into the darkness. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying voices only he could hear. The ancestors, the spirits, the land itself, mourning what he had done. He turned back toward the village, his newfound wealth heavy in his hands, yet his soul felt unbearably light, as though something vital had been torn from him. The omens began almost immediately. The village fires flickered wildly that night, though the air was still. The dogs howled at nothing, their cries mournful and unrelenting. The sky, once clear, clouded over as if the heavens themselves wept. Jabari ignored it all, drowning himself in the comfort of his wealth. He paraded through the village, his pockets lined with gold, his presence suddenly commanding respect. He feasted where before he had hungered, he smiled where before he had scowled. Yet beneath it all, a hollow void gnawed at him. Days passed and the village elders began to sense the shift. Zuri's absence did not go unnoticed. The children, once so attached to her, wandered aimlessly, asking when she would return. The sick went without her healing hands. The night felt colder without her stories to weave warmth into their spirits. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Where is Zuri?" She would never leave without word. Jabari heard the questions, felt the eyes on him, but he silenced his guilt with every gold coin he grasped. He told himself it was done, that he had made the right choice. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the village slept and only the wind spoke, Jabari found no rest. For in the silence he heard her voice, soft, broken, echoing through the trees. Why, Jabari? The spirits had not forgotten. And neither would he. The sky darkened without warning. Heavy clouds rolled in like a tide of shadow, swallowing the sun and casting an eerie twilight over the land. A gust of wind howled through the trees, sending leaves spiraling into the air. The captors, once confident in their control over their prisoners, now hesitated, glancing nervously at the shifting heavens. Then the storm struck. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the terrified faces of the men who had bound Zuri and the others. Thunder roared, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. Rain poured down in thick sheets, turning the dirt path into a treacherous mire. Horses reared, their panicked cries piercing through the howling wind. The captors shouted to one another, but their voices were lost in the chaos. Zuri felt the energy in the air, a force greater than mere weather. This was no ordinary storm. A sudden gust snapped the ropes binding her hands, as though unseen hands had severed them. She did not wait for an explanation. "Run!" she shouted to the others, her voice barely audible over the storm's fury. The captives hesitated for only a moment before they understood. This was their chance. Together they sprinted into the dense forest, their footsteps muffled by the rain-drenched earth. The shouts of their captors faded behind them, swallowed by the storm. Zuri ran blindly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Trees loomed around her, their trunks slick with rain, their branches swaying wildly in the wind. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to move forward. Then the forest shifted. The chaotic sounds of the storm faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. The rain lessened and a strange warmth settled in the air. Zuri slowed her steps, glancing around. The trees here were ancient, their roots twisting into the earth like the fingers of sleeping giants. Fireflies danced between the branches, casting a golden glow. A faint hum vibrated in the air, almost like a song whispered through the leaves. She was not alone. From the shadows, figures emerged. They were unlike any people she had ever seen. Their garments were woven with intricate patterns, shimmering faintly under the glow of firelight. Their eyes held wisdom beyond years, and their skin bore markings, symbols eerily similar to the ones carved into the stone the old woman had given her. One among them stepped forward. A tall figure, draped in robes of deep indigo, his face lined with the weight of leadership. He studied Zuri with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You have come," he said, his voice a blend of curiosity and certainty. Zuri swallowed hard. "Who are you?" she asked. The man smiled. "We are the keepers of the lost bloodline," he said. "And you, child, bear its mark." Zuri instinctively touched her arm, where a faint birthmark rested, a symbol she had never given much thought to before. "You were always meant to find us," he continued. "Or rather, we were meant to find you." Confusion swirled in Zuri's mind. "I don't understand," she admitted. "You will," he said. "But first you must prove yourself worthy of your ancestors' legacy." Thus began her trials. The first was a test of endurance. She was led to a river, its waters dark and still. She was told to swim to the other side, where a single flame flickered atop a stone. The current was strong, the water colder than ice, but Zuri pushed forward. Every stroke felt like a battle against an unseen force, yet she refused to surrender. When she reached the flame and cupped it in her hands, warmth spread through her body, igniting something deep within her, a power she had not known she possessed. The second trial was a test of wisdom. She was brought before a council of elders, each presenting her with a riddle woven with the knowledge of the past. She listened, her mind racing, recalling stories she had heard as a child. The answers came not from logic alone, but from intuition, from the whispers of the ancestors that seemed to echo in the depths of her soul. The final trial was a test of spirit. She was taken to the sacred tree at the heart of the village, its roots entwined with the bones of those who had come before. There she was asked to face her greatest fear. And there, standing before the tree, the wind whispering secrets around her, she saw him. Jabari. His figure flickered like a shadow in the firelight, his expression one of torment and regret. "Why do you haunt me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jabari's eyes, once filled with arrogance, now held sorrow. "I was blind, Zuri," he murmured. "Blinded by gold. I thought I could trade you for wealth, but instead I traded my own soul." Zuri clenched her fists, anger warring with the ache in her heart. "You betrayed me." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "And I would give anything to undo it." Tears burned Zuri's eyes, but she did not let them fall. This was not just about him. It was about her. "You must choose," the tribe's leader said, his voice steady. "Will you carry your hatred forward, or will you rise beyond it?" Zuri inhaled deeply. She closed her eyes, letting the memories wash over her, the pain, the loss, the betrayal. Then she let them go. She would not be defined by what had been done to her. She would be defined by what she became. When she opened her eyes, the vision of Jabari faded, the weight in her chest lifting. The tribe's leader nodded in approval. You are ready. Zuri had passed the trials. She was no longer just a captive, no longer just a girl betrayed. She was something greater. She was destiny unfolding. You said. As the sun rose over the hidden village, its golden light filtering through the thick canopy, Zuri sat in quiet reflection. The events of the past days had changed her in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. She had arrived as a prisoner, lost and betrayed, but now she was something else, someone else. The tribe's elders gathered around her in the sacred clearing, their faces solemn yet filled with a quiet reverence. At the center stood the leader, the one who had first recognized the mark she bore. In his hands, he held a staff carved from the wood of an ancient tree, its surface etched with the same symbols she had seen in the stone the old woman had given her. You carry the blood of the first seers, the elder said, his voice deep with meaning. Your ancestors were the guardians of balance, those who spoke with the spirits and walked between worlds. Zuri's breath caught. She had always felt something different within her, an instinct, a pull toward forces unseen, but she had never known why. Your power has always been with you, another elder said. But it is only now that you are ready to embrace it. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once tended to the sick, that had woven stories from memory. Now they trembled not with fear but with the weight of destiny. Then came the truth that chilled her blood. Jabari's greed had not only cost her freedom, it had cursed their village. The elders spoke of an ancient law, one that dictated that betrayal for personal gain disrupted the harmony between the seen and unseen worlds. The moment Jabari had sold his own blood for gold, the spirits of the land had turned their backs on Nyumbani. The rivers had begun to dry, the harvests had withered, and a darkness loomed over the people. Zuri felt a surge of anger and sorrow. Had the village suffered for his crimes? Had their home, her home, begun to crumble under the weight of his betrayal? She closed her eyes and saw it in her mind's eye, the faces of those she had loved, the elders who had guided her, the children who had once gathered to hear her stories. Had they felt abandoned? Had they wondered why the gods had forsaken them? She clenched her fists. She could walk away. This tribe had accepted her, welcomed her as one of their own. Here she could start anew, free from the shadows of her past. But the past was not something to be escaped. It was something to be faced. I must return, Zuri said, her voice steady despite the storm within her. I must go back to my people. The elders nodded as if they had known all along what her decision would be. You do not return as the girl who was taken, the leader said. You return as one who has awakened. They prepared her for the journey ahead. First, they passed down sacred knowledge, chants and incantations woven from the words of the ancestors, prayers that could mend what had been broken. They taught her the ways of the spirits, how to listen to the whispers carried by the wind, how to see the truth hidden beneath the surface of reality. Then they gave her gifts, a cloak woven from the threads of the midnight sky, to conceal her from those who sought to harm her. A dagger, its hilt wrapped in leather, its blade forged from a metal that shimmered like the moon. A weapon but also a symbol of her strength. And finally, a talisman, an amulet carved from a single piece of stone, etched with the mark of her ancestors. A reminder of who she was and who she was becoming. As she stood at the edge of the forest, the wind rustling through the trees, Zuri took one final look at the hidden village. These people had saved her, had given her the knowledge to reclaim her fate. Now it was time to face her past. With the weight of destiny upon her shoulders and the whispers of the ancestors in her ears, Zuri stepped forward. She was going home. Zuri stood at the edge of her village, the familiar scent of earth and smoke filling her lungs. The place she once called home looked different now, withered crops, cracked earth, and an eerie silence that seemed to grip the air. The once thriving community was now a mere shadow of itself, the energy drained as if life itself had abandoned it. She stepped forward, her feet moving with purpose yet heavy with the weight of memory. The last time she had walked these paths, she had been an innocent woman full of dreams. Now she returned as something more, someone forged by pain, wisdom, and destiny. Her presence did not go unnoticed. Whispers spread like wildfire as villagers emerged from their huts, eyes widening in disbelief. Some gasped, clutching their chests as if seeing a ghost. Others murmured prayers under their breath. She has returned, an old woman whispered. The ancestors have sent her back, another said. But there was fear too. Not of her, but of what her return might mean. At the center of the village, Jabari stood frozen, his face drained of color. He was no longer the proud, ambitious young man she had once known. His fine robes were stained, his once bright eyes now hollow. The gold he had traded her for had not brought him prosperity, it had drained the very soul from his being. Zuri's gaze locked onto him. In that moment everything else faded. "You thought I was gone forever," she said, her voice strong, carrying across the village like the wind before a storm. Jabari swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "Zuri." He took a step back, his body betraying the fear he tried to hide. The villagers, sensing the weight of the moment, formed a circle around them, watching, waiting. The elders approached, their faces etched with sorrow and disappointment. The oldest among them, Elder Omari, stepped forward, his staff thudding against the ground. His once mighty frame had weakened, but his presence still commanded respect. "The spirits have been restless," Elder Omari said. "The land has suffered. The river no longer sings and the trees refuse to bear fruit. We knew a great betrayal had been committed, but we did not know the full truth, until now." Jabari's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. A sudden gust of wind swept through the village, rustling the trees as if nature itself was bearing witness to this moment. Zuri took a step closer. "Why, Jabari?" she asked, her voice laced with sorrow. "Why did you trade my life for gold?" Jabari's lips quivered, but he could not answer. He had no excuse, no justification that would erase what he had done. The villagers murmured in anger. Some shook their heads, others clenched their fists. The truth had been unspoken for too long, and now that it had surfaced, there was no turning away from it. Elder Omari raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "Zuri," he said, "you have returned not only with your life but with something greater. The wisdom of the ancestors is in your eyes. The strength of your journey is in your stance. You are not the same woman who was taken from us." Zuri nodded. She had come back not as a victim but as a force of destiny. "The spirits demand balance," another elder said. "Justice must be served." Jabari fell to his knees. His hands clutched at the dirt, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please," he whispered. "I was blinded by greed. The gold, it was a curse, not a blessing. It brought me nothing but ruin. I see that now." Zuri looked at him, the brother who had once protected her, who had laughed with her under the moonlight as children. But that was a lifetime ago. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the ancestors around her. They did not speak, but she could feel their presence, waiting for her to decide. The village watched, holding its collective breath. Would she call for vengeance? Would she demand his blood as payment for his betrayal? Or would she choose something else? Zuri opened her eyes. "Jabari," she said, her voice firm, "you sought to gain everything, yet you lost yourself in the process. The ancestors have spoken through the suffering of this land. You have broken the sacred trust between family, between kin." Jabari trembled. "Please? I will do anything to undo what I've done." Zuri studied him for a long moment, then turned to the elders. "The land has suffered because of his greed. To restore balance he must give back what he took." Elder Omari nodded. "What do you propose?" Zuri took a deep breath. "Jabari will work the land, rebuilding what has been lost. Every piece of gold he gained through betrayal must be returned, not to him but to the village. He will live among those he betrayed, not as a man of status, but as one who must earn back his place." The villagers murmured. Some had wanted harsher punishment, but as they looked at Zuri, they saw the wisdom in her choice. Vengeance would not heal the land, only redemption could. Jabari looked up at her, his eyes filled with something unreadable. Perhaps relief, perhaps shame. "You are given a second chance," Elder Omari said to Jabari. "Do not waste it." Jabari bowed his head. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. The first drop fell, then another. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd as they lifted their faces to the sky. For the first time in months the rain had returned. Zuri let the raindrops kiss her skin, her heart swelling with a deep understanding. The spirits had accepted her decision. The land would heal. As the villagers cheered, embracing one another, Zuri felt a peace she had not known in a long time. She had faced her past. She had reclaimed her destiny. And now a new chapter was beginning. She looked at the horizon where the storm had passed, leaving the sky clear and full of light. Her story was not over. It had only just begun. The village gathered under the towering baobab tree, the sacred place where decisions of great importance were made. The rain had washed away the dust of suffering, and now the people stood in the fresh, damp earth, waiting for the final judgment. Zuri, standing tall and resolute, looked around at the faces of her people. Their eyes held sorrow, relief, and the hope of a new beginning. She had been wronged in the cruelest way, betrayed by her own blood, but she had returned not as a victim but as a force of change. She turned to Jabari, who stood before the elders with his head bowed. His fine robes were gone, replaced with simple garments that matched his diminished state. The once proud man who had traded his own sister for gold was now humbled before the very people he had deceived. Zuri took a deep breath, feeling the wisdom of the ancestors settle in her heart. She could still see the pain in Jabari's eyes, the guilt that weighed on his shoulders. He had lost everything, not just his wealth but the trust of his people, the love of his family and his own sense of self. "I have walked the path of suffering," Zuri said, her voice carrying over the silent crowd. "I have seen the darkness of greed and I have felt the sting of betrayal. But I have also seen the power of mercy. The ancestors have guided me back, not to seek vengeance but to restore balance." The elders nodded in approval, their ancient faces unreadable but their spirits attentive. Zuri stepped forward, meeting Jabari's gaze. "Jabari, you stole my freedom. You traded my life for gold, blinded by greed. But your wealth brought you nothing but suffering. The land has rejected you, the people have turned from you, and even the ancestors have watched in silence." Jabari clenched his jaw, shame washing over him. He did not deny the truth. "But," Zuri continued, her tone shifting, "even the most broken of us can find our way back." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mercy was not what they had expected. Many had wanted Jabari exiled, punished, or worse. But Zuri had always been different. She did not seek destruction where restoration was possible. "I will not cast you out," Zuri declared, "but I will not allow you to remain the man you have been. You must atone for your actions." Jabari lifted his head, eyes wide with surprise. "How?" he whispered. "The gold you gained through betrayal will be returned to the village," Zuri said. "Every piece. Not for one man's gain but for the healing of our people. You will work the land, rebuild the homes that have crumbled, and care for the elders who have suffered. You will prove your worth, not through words but through action." Murmurs spread among the villagers. Some still held anger but many nodded in understanding. The land had suffered under greed's shadow, and only through selfless labor could it be restored. Jabari fell to his knees, tears brimming in his eyes. "I will do as you command. I will work until my hands bleed, until the ancestors see fit to forgive me." The elders stepped forward. "Then let it be so," Elder Omari said. "May this serve as a lesson to all. Greed is a curse, but redemption is a path open to those willing to walk it." The people cheered, their voices filled with relief, gratitude, and hope. The weight of betrayal had been lifted, and in its place the seeds of healing were sown. The merchant, the dark force who had whispered temptation into Jabari's ears, had long since fled. His influence was erased, his gold now worthless in a village that had found its soul again. Zuri turned to her people. "Let this day mark a new beginning. We will not be known as the village that fell to greed, but as the people who rose from it. We will honor the ancestors, care for our land, and never again let gold speak louder than love." A great feast was prepared that night, not in celebration of victory, but in honor of wisdom and growth. The village danced, sang, and told stories of Zuri's journey, her trials, and the mercy that had set things right. Her name would be remembered not just as a survivor but as a legend. Jabari, though stripped of his status, found solace in his labor. Day by day he worked to mend what he had broken. He rebuilt homes, tended the fields, and sat with the elders, learning the wisdom he had once ignored. It would take time, but redemption was a path, not a moment. And Zuri? She had found her destiny. No longer just a healer or a storyteller, she had become something greater. A beacon of resilience, a guardian of justice, and a leader in the hearts of her people. As she looked at the stars that night, she felt the ancestors watching. They did not speak, but she felt their blessing in the wind, in the rustling leaves, in the steady beat of her heart. Her story was not just her own anymore, it belonged to all who had ever faced betrayal and found the strength to rise again. Zuri's life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The girl who once roamed the village with innocent dreams had walked through fire and emerged not only stronger but wiser. She had endured betrayal at the hands of her own blood, suffered through captivity, and fought against forces that sought to break her spirit. Yet, through it all, she had remained true to herself, guided by the wisdom of her ancestors and the unshakable belief that destiny had a plan. The village, once tainted by greed and loss, now flourished again. The land, once barren under Jabari's selfish rule, had begun to heal, its crops growing tall and lush. The people, once divided by mistrust, now stood together with renewed unity, remembering that no amount of wealth could replace the bond of community. Jabari worked tirelessly to redeem himself, though he knew he might never fully erase the stain of his betrayal. He no longer held the title of leader, nor did he seek admiration. Instead, he found solace in labor, in the quiet act of rebuilding what he had once torn apart. Day by day he became a different man, not through words but through action. As for Zuri, she became more than just a storyteller or a healer. She became a guardian of truth, a symbol of resilience for all who knew her tale. The children of the village gathered around her each evening, eager to hear her stories, not just of faraway lands and ancient spirits, but of the lessons she had learned in her own journey. Greed, she would tell them, is a hunger that can never be satisfied. It will consume all that you have until nothing remains. The elders nodded in agreement, for they too had learned a harsh lesson. The betrayal that had threatened to break them had instead made them wiser, more protective of the values they had long upheld. Zuri's story spread beyond the borders of her village, carried by travelers and whispered in markets. Her name became legend, a tale of betrayal, survival, and redemption that would be passed down for generations. And with it, a powerful lesson endured. Gold can buy many things, but it cannot buy a pure heart. Zuri never sought wealth, nor did she desire revenge. She had seen the damage greed could do, and she had chosen a different path. One of wisdom. One of forgiveness. One of strength. As she sat beneath the great baobab tree one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced darkness and had not let it consume her. She had been betrayed but had not let it define her. She had found her destiny, not in riches, but in the unbreakable spirit that no gold could ever buy. And so her story lived on, a guiding light for all who listened.